for his first State of the Union and takes to Twitter to slam the status quo on illegal immigrants.
Plus, we'll talk to a former assistant FBI director about the political flack aimed at the Bureau and special counsel Robert Mueller.
And the nation's deadly flu epidemic breaks new records across the country, and it may be weeks before this outbreak is over. Well, President Trump back from touting America first during his trip to Davos, Switzerland. But here at home, the battle over one of the administration's major proposals is picking up some steam. Rich Edson is at the White House with more. Hi, Rich.
Hey, good afternoon, Leah. And DACA deadlines and a busy week ahead for the White House as the president will deliver his State of the Union address, though these DACA negotiations continue to dominate the discussion here in Washington about the so-called Dreamers, those brought to the United States illegally as children. The president is removing that program that protected them under the Obama administration on March 5th, and he says it's up to Congress now to figure out a solution. But the White House has floated a proposal on all this, suggesting that Congress should pass a law that protects about 1.8 million of the so-called Dreamers and giving them a 10 to 12-year path to citizenship with requirements for work, education, and what the White House says, good moral character. But the president, the White House want some items in return. They want $25 billion for a trust fund for the border wall system, to eliminate the visa lottery system, and an end to chain migration. Despite the asks in return, the president and White House maintain that Republicans and the president want to solve the DACA issue.
If we make the right deal, I think they will. These are people that have very strong opinions on DACA and on immigration generally, and I happen to think they're largely right. Look, we're going to try and make a deal on DACA. We have a good chance of making it. What we need is we need the wall. We need security. We need security at the border. We have to stop the drugs from coming in. We need safety, and we need a strong military.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has rejected the president's proposal. He says now the wall and funding for it is off the table. The president and the White House are also getting some negative reaction from the right on their proposal. This statement from Heritage Action saying, quote, amnesty comes in many forms, but it seems they are all eventually grow in size and scope. Any proposal that expands the amnesty-eligible population risks opening Pandora's box and could lead to a Gang of Eight style negotiation that should be a non-starter. And that's all wrapped up, of course, into the government funding debate. Government funding, most of it or much of it, runs out in the early part of next month. So plenty for the White House to be involved here as Congress continues its negotiations.
Yeah, and they certainly want to get that wrapped up as soon as they can. Rich Edson, thank you.
Thanks.
Newly revealed text messages between two FBI agents have Republican lawmakers claiming, quote, the fix was in for Hillary Clinton's email investigation. Lauren Blanchard joining us now as she's been going through some of this. Find the smoking gun yet, or still a lot of smoke?
Well, Leland, these texts were thought to be lost due to a technical glitch, but the DOJ Inspector General says they were able to recover them, the timing of which some lawmakers say is disconcerting. Now, plus these texts are boosting Republicans who believe Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible Russian collusion during the presidential election is biased because the officials who exchanged the messages, now demoted FBI agent Peter Strzok and reassigned FBI lawyer Lisa Page, both briefly worked on the Russia probe, and many of their texts suggest an anti-Trump sentiment.
Mueller has some ethical issues and ethical conflicts that need to be resolved, and the American people wanting a special counsel into maybe some of the investigations that led to his own criminal investigation related to Russia collusion ought to be very interesting.
And the texts were released by Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley and suggest senior FBI officials were concerned that being too tough on Hillary Clinton for her email use could come back to hurt them if she were elected president. And it's not the first time lawmakers have been critical of the DOJ, prompting the Attorney General to defend his department.
Sunlight is the best infectant, truly. Truth breeds confidence. A culture of defensiveness is not acceptable. The Department of Justice does not always know what's best. We're not always perfect.
The struck page texts also show back in March of 2016 there was a proposal circulating, at least in some meetings, to name former U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald as a special prosecutor of the possible Clinton email probe. However, Fitzgerald was never appointed despite Republicans calling for it. Now, some of those fiercest advocates for a Clinton email probe say the texts are renewing suspicion that top officials never planned to pursue charges in that case, Leland.
We seem to learn more and more about this every day. A lot more on this. Steve Pomerantz, formerly Assistant Deputy Director of the FBI, with more on this later in the show. Lauren, thank you. Leah?
Well, President Trump's latest proposal for immigration reform is, as you've heard, drawing fire from both sides of the aisle. Ellison Barber has the latest details on the president's proposal.
Hi, Leah. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called the White House's framework guidance that, quote, indicates what is necessary for the president to sign a bill into law. I am hopeful that as discussions continue in the Senate on the subject of immigration, members on both sides of the aisle will look to this framework for guidance as they work towards an agreement. Before the White House's outline made its way to Congress, a senator involved in bipartisan immigration talks said talks in the Senate would continue regardless of what happens at the White House.
Appreciate all the input from the White House, but Mitch McConnell has decided the body will find its own voice. We're not going to be locked down by thinking about what the House might do or what the White House might do. We're going to move on our own.
The White House hasn't released a complete blueprint of their proposal, only a framework, but already there are critics on the left and the right.
They want the ransom for these children to be $25 billion for a wall when we have all the needs that we have for infrastructure in our own country.
If the president serves up 1.8 million people for an amnesty in exchange for $25 billion for a wall, and then reduces the numbers of chain migration that come in, that's the end of his enforcement that he's going to get in his administration, unless we come up with another amnesty to serve it up.
Some key conservatives like Senator Tom Cotton say they like the White House's proposal. Cotton called it generous and humane. He said it was a balance between protecting dreamers and securing the border. In the past, some on Capitol Hill said they were frustrated because many felt like they didn't know exactly what President Trump wanted in an immigration proposal. Leader McConnell suggesting in his statement that this is some clarity. Leah?
All right, Ellison Barber, thank you. Leland?
All right, a little more insight on this. Bring in Florida Congressman Francis Rooney. Nice to see you as always, sir. Appreciate you being here on a weekend. We'll start where you and I were just talking, which is that forget agreement between Republicans and Democrats. There isn't even agreement among Republicans on what the red lines are.
Well, we've seen how wide the spectrum of ideologies of Republicans is when we had the health care debate, and I think we're going to see it again in the next 2 weeks when we figure out how much security enhancement and cleaning up our broken immigration system we need to have to even consider DACA.
Well, and you just said something that was key here, how big the ideological spread was when it came to the health care debate. That didn't end so well for Republicans.
No, it didn't. And I hope this ends better for Republicans. I hope that we get a DACA bill that is reasonable, not one that is amnesty.
You've just laid out that you have the same ideological spread. It didn't work out in health care. Why should it work out with a deal on immigration, even among House Republicans?
Well, I think first of all, there's a lot of sentiment to try to take care of these kids who were cruelly brought here by President Obama under false pretenses. And if we can take care of them and also clean up the ridiculous immigration system and visa overstay problem that we have, it might be worth it.
We have this framework from the president and sort of this concept of among a bipartisan group in the Senate. We're watching some video during the government shutdown debate where there was a bunch of pro-DACA protesters brought in. This framework says, okay, we'll trade essentially amnesty or a path to citizenship for the DACA kids in return for funding for the wall. There's nothing in there about ending chain migration, nothing in there about ending the diversity lottery program, both of which your camp in the House says are necessary.
Well, Leland, the original deal that Dianne Feinstein and Kevin McCarthy did with the president before Schumer stuck his nose into it included DACA legalization, but I don't think it talked about citizenship yet, included getting rid of chain migration, included getting rid of the diversity lottery, and included some security enhancements, including some wall.
Well, you said the operative words, though, before Chuck Schumer got involved. Democrats seem to view this as a political hill not only worth dying on, but one that they really can gain a lot of traction on.
Using it to shut down the government didn't do them very much good. I think they found out that Americans want their government to work, and then they may have thoughts about DACA as well.
The optics of not getting a deal on this would not work very well. We know that getting funding for a wall is going to require some type of deal with Democrats in the Senate. They've got some leverage, too, on this, especially over hardliners in the House. How do you combat that?
Well, we could be right back where we were just last week if they don't get with the program and cut a reasonable deal that protects America's security and sovereignty while also dealing with these children that have been brought into the country.
Well, the Democrats would argue that they got something out of the shutdown as well. They're forcing DACA now. 700,000 people who are in this country illegally somehow are driving the political conversation of 300 million people.
Well, I think what Schumer got was a commitment of Mitch McConnell to bring up a vote in the Senate.
So that's a good point. No commitments out of the House. What does the House do that the Senate has a reasonable chance of passing?
I think the House is going to be a lot closer to what the president put out yesterday or this morning than the Senate.
So you're okay with what the president's proposal was?
I'm easy about the citizenship thing in 10 to 12 years, but I am for, with reasonable security changes and getting migration changed to skills and away from chain families and this diversity lottery. I'd love to get rid of all that.
All right. Unusually, the House of Representatives is working for 3 weeks straight. I know that's tough for you guys to have to put in 3 weeks in Washington. After that, though, you're going back down to South Florida. You've got to face constituents, as do all of your fellow members who are then up in 2018. How much leeway will they give you on this?
I love to face my constituencies and have an engaged discussion with them about all these issues. The town halls we've had so far have been both very enjoyable and important information exchanges. And I can't wait to bring up DACA, and I'll bring up medical again if they want to, and anything else they want.
So in other words, what you're saying is that if anything, that's empowering for you, that they're not giving, certainly conservative Republicans, a lot of leash.
It's empowering for me because the big part of this job is to know what the people in District 19 think. And a big part of my job is to communicate why I believe what I believe.
All right. Well, you've been here doing it a lot. We appreciate it. It's good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me back on, Leland.
Always. Leah?
All right. Well, now for reaction from the other side of the aisle, let's bring in Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar, whose district borders Mexico. Nice to see you, Congressman.
Thank you so much.
So I just want to start with this. What are the main issues that you see as problematic in the president's proposal?
Look, we all want to address, I think we've heard that from my friend Francis and other folks. We want to address DACA, but one of the issues that comes up is, what do we mean by border security? And with all due respect for anybody that comes to the border and spends a few hours and think they know better than we do, for the ones that spend the time and we live here, they just don't understand the border. The border is a very dynamic area where every day we have $1.3 billion of trade. NAFTA is important to us. We want to secure the border in a sensible way. But if you think that the only way of securing the border is using a wall, that's not the right way of doing it.
Well, you say that border security is important to you and your constituents, and yet we've seen this influx of illegal immigrants coming through that border into our country. And that's what people are so frustrated about. So help us understand what border security means to you and what you think needs to be done beyond a wall.
Well, first of all, if you use technology, use the right mixture of personnel, work with people, the countries across the river, because we're playing defense on the 1 yard line where we spend $18 billion a year. Keep in mind that 40% of the undocumented persons who came here came through a legal visa or permit. So you can put the most beautiful wall, but they're going to either fly or they're going to get on a ship or they're going to go in a car, a bus coming across a bridge. And if you want to stop drugs, look at the latest DEA report.
So what are you saying? Are you saying more technical surveillance? Are you saying using more technology? What are you proposing here?
The military, and I've been asking CBP to do this. If you use the surplus equipment that I've seen in Afghanistan and we used to see there in Iraq, for example, the aerostats or other equipment that the military has that taxpayers have paid already, we can use that equipment. They work for the military. Let's use it for ourselves. Remember, the drugs are coming into the United States. They come through our bridges, so let's focus on the bridges.
Okay.
Except for marijuana,
So-
that's where the drugs are coming in.
So, Congressman, it sounds like you're in line with some of what we're actually hearing from this administration, that there needs to be technology, that it wouldn't just be a wall, although the wall is very important in some form to President Trump's base. It's, many say, a big part of what got him elected. So, of course, that's going to be important. But I want to ask you, the White House has shown a willingness to give some concessions to try to get an immigration deal done. What concessions are Democrats willing to give? It doesn't sound like there's much when you listen to someone like Nancy Pelosi speak right now.
Well, I can't speak for other Democrats, but I can speak for Democrats, for the ones that Republicans are on the border, where we represent the border. We want to put more resources. We want to make sure that we address the issues that we have. For example, did you know that we're losing more Border Patrol, men and women in green, than we're actually hiring Border Patrol? We had to, the administration paid about $290 million contract to a private contractor to help them hire Border Patrol. So at one time we had 21,500 Border Patrol agents. We now have about 18,500 Border Patrol agents.
So clearly you want to go ahead and increase border security. That's clearly important to you from what you're saying in your district. But the big question is, how are you going to get there on an immigration bill? What are you doing to try to bring Democrats and Republicans to the table to try to get something comprehensive passed on immigration, sir?
Certainly, as you know, I've been at the White House several times. I think I have a good working relationship with the White House, and I want to work with the president. I want to work with people like Mark George and other folks that, that I think we can get together. The problem is we got two extremes, quite honestly, on the left and the right. Some people don't want to have any sort of border security. There are some people that think that the only way to secure the border is using a 14th century solution called the wall. There are ways to address the security. I think they ought to listen to folks that are in the border, and I think we can come up with a way of securing the border.
Well, I think a lot of people understand that it'll go beyond just having a wall and having a wall in various forms at this point. Congressman Cuellar, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Leland?
All right, coming up, America's flu epidemic breaking new records. We're going to find out if there's any end in sight for this year's outbreak, which has already claimed the lives of hundreds of people, including dozens of children.
Everything's normal, just a regular cold, and then shocking. You get a call that he's passed. How the hell does that happen?
Plus, heavy flooding. And we're going to talk to former Assistant FBI Director Steve Pomerantz on all the tough accusations made about the Bureau and Special Counsel Robert Mueller.
Why did you fire Robert Mueller? Why did you want to fire Robert Mueller?
Fake news, folks. Fake news.
Welcome back. This Saturday, the flu killing Americans in numbers not seen in nearly a decade. Some estimates say 50,000 will die before this flu season ends. In some places, patients are overwhelming hospitals as even the flu vaccine appears ineffective. Molly Line in New York with the very latest on this. Hi, Molly.
Hi, Leland. No doubt this is a particularly nasty season for the flu, as you mentioned, possibly the worst in nearly a decade. The numbers still coming in. The CDC reports that the flu is very widespread. It's striking all across the nation. Only Hawaii has been spared the brunt of this very brutal and deadly season. A 12-year-old boy among the young victims of this, particularly vulnerable, Dylan Winnick of Coral Springs, Florida, was claimed his life this past Tuesday on January 23rd. He was a student at the Okahili Community Middle School, where his friends and classmates are mourning his loss. 37 pediatric deaths have been reported this season, and U.S. health officials expect there will be more in the coming weeks. Ominously comparing this year to the 2014-15 season, where there were 148 pediatric deaths reported for that total year. This year's main flu strain, the influenza A virus, known as H3N1, is especially virulent, and overall vaccine effectiveness is lower. The CDC tracking reveals that last week, 1 out of 15 doctor visits were for symptoms of the flu. That is the highest level since the swine flu pandemic of 2009. And this flu season is far from over. We are only halfway there. Health officials continue to urge people to stay home if you're sick, cover your cough, and if you have not yet done so, there is still plenty of time to get that flu shot. Leland?
Yeah, in some places, the infection rate even getting worse by the day. Molly Line in New York. Molly, thank you.
Residents in Paris are trying to stay dry as the Marne and Seine rivers flood the streets after unprecedented heavy rainfall there. Flood alerts are in place, and Paris authorities have closed several tunnels, parks, and the bottom floor of the Louvre Museum. The rivers are set to crest in Paris tomorrow, and the high water levels are expected to last all into next week. We'll be watching that.
The devastating impact from the 2017 hurricane season may soon be felt at your local supermarket. Experts say billions of honeybees were drowned as hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria hit the United States. The loss of honeybees would have a direct impact on U.S. crops that depend on cross-pollination, and Florida's pollination season is set to begin next week.
There is a global epidemic on honeybees. They are dying by the millions every single day.
1 in every 3 bites of food we eat comes from honeybees.
When Irma's floodwaters swept through the southern state last fall, it took more than 7,500 hives with it. That according to agricultural officials there down in Florida.
Still ahead, investigating the investigators. Some GOP lawmakers accusing the FBI of surveillance abuses. We'll talk to a former director of the FBI. That's next. And Chick-fil-A creating its own version of the Happy Meal for one special customer. The big reveal coming up.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back.
Some Republican lawmakers are now saying the fix was in during the Hillary Clinton email investigation. This comes after revealing the latest batch of texts between 2 now former members of the special counsel's team. Fox News chief intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge has the latest.
Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee predict their 4-page staff memo documenting alleged government surveillance abuses could be released very soon.
Within the next week to 10 days, 2 weeks to most, it should be made public.
190 Republicans and a dozen Democrats have read the document that Fox News understands was crafted for wide distribution. Sensitive information was kept to a minimum and limited redactions are needed.
There's nothing in there at all which could tip an enemy off as to what methods we use or any sources we have.
The committee's ranking Democrat, Adam Schiff, drafted his own memo and joined forces with senior Senate Democrat Dianne Feinstein. They want Facebook and Twitter to investigate claims the Release the Memo hashtag was the top trending hashtag among Twitter accounts believed to be operated by Kremlin-linked groups. As momentum to release the House Intelligence Memo builds, texts recently made public seem to reinforce Republican concerns about FBI senior leadership under former Director Comey.
Before we got these text messages, we all suspected the fix was in on the Clinton investigation. Now that we've seen these text messages, we know the fix was in.
Republican Senator Chuck Grassley released text messages from February 2016 that suggest now demoted FBI agent Peter Strzok and reassigned FBI lawyer Lisa Page fretted about the impact of a rigorous investigation of Hillary Clinton and the mishandling of classified information. Page writes, "One more thing. She might be our next president. The last thing you need us going in there loaded for bear. You think she's going to remember or care that it was more DOJ than FBI?" Strzok replied, "Agreed." They also discussed the idea of a special counsel to take over the Clinton email case and floated Patrick Fitzgerald, who investigated national security leaks during the Bush administration. The text referenced the use of non-government email accounts and encrypted apps for FBI business, a possible violation of federal records laws. Before the Justice Department confirmed thousands of texts were recovered after a technical problem, Grassley said the timing was disconcerting.
Maybe there's a legitimacy for it, but doesn't it seem a little strange?
Senator Grassley also wants to release transcripts from the committee's investigation of the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, including an interview with the president's son. Grassley said Feinstein spooked potential witnesses from testifying after she released a transcript on her own about the Trump dossier. Feinstein says she wants the transcripts out as long as it doesn't impact the special counsel investigation. In Washington, Catherine Herridge, Fox News.
All right, let's bring in Steve Pomerantz, former FBI Assistant Director. The FBI as a whole, an esteemed organization, without question. Are we to believe that there are two fairly senior people who are, number one, having an affair, what you do on your own time is your own time, but are dumb enough to talk about it on their FBI cell phones and then talk about investigations in this way on their FBI cell phones?
I think there's, whether we want to believe it or not, yeah, we know that, we certainly know that that's taken place. Now, look, FBI agents, whether they're having affairs or not, FBI employees who are assigned to the same investigations regularly talk about them. There's no prohibition against that. In fact, it's probably positive rather than negative, whether they do it by email or cell phone.
Or should they be talking about the substance of the investigation, or should they be, at least what we saw in this case from Catherine's report, talking about the political implications of it? I thought the whole point of the FBI was they didn't care about the political implications.
I think there's a difference here in expressing your feelings about politics. Look, every FBI agent has their own political leanings, political feelings, and they're free to express those as long as it doesn't impact on what they do officially. There's a big difference between holding a political point of view and allowing that political point of view to influence your official actions.
You and I were on this set during the actual time that Hillary Clinton was being interviewed by the FBI.
Right.
And you made the point over and over again that you really felt that the Bureau was going to call this one fair, and they were going to call balls and strikes. Does anything that you've seen in these text messages lead you to believe that hasn't happened?
Not necessarily what I've seen in the text messages. Look, you're right. We did that, and I was certainly disturbed at the actions of the director subsequent to that, going on having a press conference and making some prosecutor pronouncements that he should not have made, in my opinion. But again, nothing I've seen in these text messages, I agree with you, is not smart, it's not seemly.
You have the guy who's leading this investigation. You have Strzok and them basically saying, hey, look, if we come down really hard on Hillary Clinton and she's our next president, that's not going to be good for us. It's not a big stretch to get to the next point of, maybe we should take it easy on her.
Yeah, one can conclude that, but you can go in a lot of different directions. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what happened. And he's not the sole. It's very hard as an individual in a major effort like this to yourself influence events to that extreme. Look, I think. Just as strongly as the inferences are, as you suggest, I think some of the things that are happening now to politicize this are every bit as bad. We have members of Congress coming on television and every day talking about the memo, without ever a memo, a horrible memo that once it's exposed will say very bad things about the FBI and its conduct. But we can't tell you what's in that memo. Just trust us. There's a memo. And it's if an FBI official came on TV and said, look, I have an investigation going about you, can't tell you what's in it, but it's going to be terrible when it comes out, you would have every right to really question that kind of conduct. And I think that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing horrible conduct on the part of people who are trying to politicize this investigation. And
we were talking about this before, and you talk about the investigation by the FBI. There's this new movie out with Liam Neeson about Mark Felt, the man known as Deep Throat during the Watergate investigation. His character in the movie says this: no one can stop the driving force of an FBI investigation, not even the FBI. Please don't comment on my impression of Liam Neeson. It was a failure of epic proportions, but the value of the statement.
I think that is 100% right. I have no idea whether Mark Feltz ever actually said that or not, but it's 100% true, Leland. An investigation, especially a major investigation such as this, has its own momentum. There are any number of people involved. The FBI, this is the raw meat for good, experienced FBI agents, is to take this, follow it, act aggressively, and it does take on a life of its own. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and the tentacles go into different places. There's an investigation we haven't talked about, at least in a while, and that's the FBI investigation into the Clinton Foundation, pay to play. That's going on down in Little Rock. Who knows where that goes, and who knows perhaps what the agents on that case are talking about right now.
I agree. And I guarantee you they're talking about it to each other in text messages, in person, and by email. And that's another reality of life in the FBI.
One might think perhaps people are a little more thoughtful about what they're talking about on their text messages after this, but you never know.
Certainly should be.
Well,
certainly should.
We all should be at times, and we all learn that one time or the other. Sometimes not on national news, though. Mr. Pomerantz, always good to see you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Leah.
Border wall funding is a key part of President Trump's new immigration proposal. When we come back, our political panel will weigh in on why it's causing such a stir on Capitol Hill. Plus, it traveled a great distance over several decades. We will show you the message in a bottle found by a South Florida couple.
I hope that someone gets my message in a bottle, yeah.
New immigration proposals from the White House would give nearly 2 million immigrants U.S. citizenship. That's in exchange for funding President Trump's border wall. But that offer for the so-called Dreamers is dividing many of the president's supporters, and it's really fueling his critics right now. So for further discussion, let's bring in Republican strategist Matt Mackowiak and Democratic strategist Robin Byro. Nice to see you both.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Matt, I want to start with you. You know, what are some of the possible scenarios for resolving this? In other words, what should the Republican strategy be?
Yeah, look, I think there really is a lot of bipartisan agreement here on both sides that they want to do something for this DACA population, these people that were brought here as children. I think the question is, you know, what do Republicans want and what do Democrats want? Democrats want certainty for these 700,000 DACA recipients, perhaps for their parents going forward, and obviously a path to citizenship. Republicans want very serious border security. They want an end to chain migration to go towards a merit-based system, and they want an end or serious reform to the visa lottery. And honestly, those are four things that Trump has been talking about since September. Now, he's put this framework out. They now have a clearer idea of exactly what he's willing to do. And obviously, with Trump putting a path to citizenship on the table, that's a very serious concession on his side. The question now is, are Democrats going to come in his direction? Because ultimately, this deal's got to be a win-win for both sides.
And Robin, I want to turn to you to answer that question, because, you know, right now the question is the president has given some concessions in this proposal. So what concessions are Democrats willing to make this happen?
We want to know where the funding is coming from for this border wall, because Donald Trump promised over and over again on the campaign trail that Mexico would pay. And just this past week, he alluded to the fact that they will pay somehow. But right now, we're concerned that he's holding these 700 lives hostage, basically, until the American taxpayers pay for this by way of this funding.
Well, it's really until
so
they
we just want to know,
right? It's not necessarily until they pay for it. It's till the agreement's been reached. But go ahead.
We want to make sure that these lives are protected. These people are contributing to our society. You know, I'm a veteran. I served in the military alongside with some of these Dreamers. They were great soldiers. Donald Trump himself said that he would hate to see these young people deported some time ago. So I think that there is a lot of bipartisan agreement. I think 70% of Americans favor a pathway to citizenship. So I think we do have a way ahead here, Leah.
And it seems like